The 70s horror scene was all about dark, gritty films. You know, George Romero, Tobe Hooper, Wes Craven, blockbusters like The Exorcist and The Omen. They were hitting it big, leaving little room for old school monster movies. But then the 80s rolled around and brought the fun back to horror. The 1980s were the heyday of prosthetics and animatronics. CGI wasn't a big thing yet, especially for lower budget films, and this meant that makeup artists like Rick Baker, Stan Winston, Tom Savini and Rob Bottin could really flex their creative muscles. So paying homage to these legends, we will explore 15 of the wildest and most grotesque movie monsters from the 1980s. Let's begin, shall we? But just before we go into our video, we have a small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Now let's begin. The Thing from The Thing, 1982. The Thing is the notorious alien antagonist from John W. Campbell's 1938 novella Who Goes There and its film adaptations. The creature is the ultimate shapeshifter. Every single cell in its body can act independently of itself, creating more of these nightmarish beings through assimilation, parasitism and infection. The creepiest part is that there's no such thing as a true form for the Thing. It's a master of disguise, always morphing and appearing as whatever it wants to imitate. In the wild, the Thing is pretty much an ambush predator. It isolates its victim, consumes them and then takes on their form. When it's cornered or feels threatened, it goes all out, sprouting tendrils, claws, mouths and whatever it takes to defend itself. The real danger though lies in its cells. Each one is a separate life form, ready to break away and start the horror all over again. That's why you have to destroy this Thing completely, down to its cellular levels. Fire seems to be the best way to go. Another thing about the Thing is that it's all about self-preservation. It will attack any other versions of itself if that means staying under the radar. When it's got a target in sight, it doesn't hesitate to launch its tendrils and start the assimilation process. If it's at risk of being exposed, it'll split into different forms to distract and conquer. Now, the Thing's smarts depend on its size. The smaller ones, not so bright, but the larger ones, especially those mimicking humans, they're cunning and manipulative. They remember everything about the beings they've assimilated, using this knowledge to their advantage. For instance, the Blair Thing built a makeshift UFO and knew how to handle dynamite. However, this intelligence isn't consistent across all large manifestations. Some, like the Rapture type Thing beasts, are overconfident and less concerned with subtlety or mobility. They often end up exposing themselves due to their aggressive nature, which ironically becomes their downfall, much like the Juliet Thing, which went on aggressive sprees only to get torched. But when the Thing does manage to escape and to hide, it regains composure and cunning, ready to strike again when the time is right. Cenobites from Hellraiser, 1987. Cenobites are a group of extra-dimensional beings who look like they walked straight out of a gothic nightmare, and then you're about halfway there. These guys are part of a bizarre extra-biblical club called the Order of the Gash. Their day job is capturing anyone who solves the Lament configuration puzzle box and introducing them to the world of extreme pain, which they believe is the ultimate pleasure. These Cenobites, creations from Clive Barker's astonishing mind, are unlike any demon you've ever heard of. They were once humans who dove too deep into some seriously dark pleasures and ended up transforming into these entities. To the human eye, they might look like demons, but really they're more like monks from another dimension. The term Cenobite itself is old school Latin, originally describing monks who interacted with the outside world. The Hellraiser Cenobites are a bit like that, but instead of spreading typical religious beliefs, they spread their own demented gospel of pain and pleasure, each one of them loaded with supernatural powers, and they have their own pet torture devices. They can pop up anywhere, anytime, if someone summons them with the puzzle box, and once they have their sights on you, good luck, they can drag you back to their world. But without the puzzle box, they can't just wander around. Take Pinhead for example. He's the boss of the Cenobites. This guy has powers that are off the charts. He can even turn humans into Cenobites after they die. This is what he did in Hellraiser number 3, making a whole squad of new Cenobites from his victims. These Cenobites are experts in both pain and pleasure, making them very effective at physical and psychological torture. But there's a catch. You can get rid of these nightmarish creatures by resolving the Lament configuration again, which sends them back to their world. Or if you're lucky enough to have some magical or holy weapons, you could take them down that way, just like in the comics. Predator from Predator 1987. The Predators, or Yautja, are intergalactic hunters and the titular monsters of the movie franchise carrying that same name. These guys are crazy about the thrill of the hunt and collect some pretty gnarly trophies from their victims' bodies, like their skulls and spinal columns still attached together. They're especially into war zones because the prey there is tougher, making trophies more prestigious. Predators have this intense sense of honing when they hunt. They won't go after easy targets, no innocent sick folks, unarmed people, no pregnant women. If you manage to beat one, they'll actually respect you for it. But like any group, you've got bad apples who don't play by the rules, and even their own kind think they're bad news, and these are rightly called the bad blood predators. Their tech is something entirely different. You could say it feels like tribal art mixed with high-end weaponry. They've got stuff like invisibility tech, shoulder cannons, and these self-destruct bombs on their wrists for when things go south. Of course, their weapons are made of elements not found on Earth, and some of their gear can shrug off acidic xenomorph blood like it's nothing. The Predator's mask is also pretty versatile when it comes to vision. It filters out heat for better infrared sight and can switch to other spectrums like X-rays to spot diseases or track heartbeats. A lot of the Predator's gear wasn't actually originally theirs. It turns out they reverse engineered it from the Amengi, who invaded their planet and enslaved their ancestors. The Yautja eventually overthrew the Amengi and took their tech and culture all for themselves. But they are more about tradition than being tech savvy anyway. They don't have dedicated scientists or engineers, so sometimes they struggle to maintain and fully understand this borrowed tech. They rather toss broken stuff than fix it, which is strange for such a technologically advanced race. Pumpkinhead from Pumpkinhead 1988. Pumpkinhead is essentially a vengeance demon who looks nothing like your typical biblical demon. He's more alien-like, incredibly strong, and has this weird connection with whoever summons him. In the 1998 film, Pumpkinhead had pale skin, a massive head sprouting multiple buds, and glowing white eyes with reptile-like pupils, but no irises. His nickname comes from his big head and the fact that he was buried in a pumpkin patch. He's got a noseless face, just nostrils sitting above a wrinkly mouth. The guy's bald, has mouthful of pointy human teeth, and sports 2 extra sharp ones on his lower jaw. You can't miss the bulging veins and bulbous growths on his neck and shoulders. The demon embodies the summoner's hatred for thirst and revenge. He's ruthless, enjoying the terror he inflicts, and often plays sadistic games of cat and mouse with his victims, thereby prolonging their suffering for kicks. Pumpkinhead's main goal is to make sure his victims suffer before they die. He's sadistic to the core, going out of his way to make his kills even more horrific. He has a one-track mind and sticks to his mission, usually hunting at night, though it's not clear why. He won't harm random folks unless they try to interfere, in which case they're fair game. Furthermore, Pumpkinhead is ridiculously strong. He can casually drag logs and overpower multiple enemies. There's this scene where he smashes and tosses cars like they're nothing at all. Then there's this weird thing where he brings powerful storms and winds wherever he goes. It's unclear if he does this on purpose or if it's just some freaky side effect of his presence. Either way, when Pumpkinhead shows up, you know things are about to get stormy. The guy's practically unkillable. Therefore, conventional weapons prove useless against him. Since he regenerates from injuries like they're nothing, the only way to stop him is to take out the person who summoned him in the first place. Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984. Freddy Krueger, the literal nightmare from the Nightmare franchise, is the very definition of a twisted joy-killing maniac. Unlike most other slashers, he relishes scaring the daylights out of his victims first. Freddy plays the long game, messing with people's dreams for weeks before striking. This guy's all over the place emotionally, swinging from euphoria to rage in a heartbeat. Before he became a vengeful spirit, Freddy was a child murderer masquerading as a Mr. Nice Guy, a loving husband and dad. But when his wife discovered his dark secret, he killed her and somehow got off scot-free. As a spirit, he's known for his over-the-top personality and his sick sense of humour, often cracking jokes while tormenting his victims. Freddy has a bit of an ego as well, and sees himself almost like a godlike figure. Unlike other slasher villains, Freddy's motive is simple. He kills for the sheer pleasure of it. He could appear in any form he wants to in people's nightmares, but he chooses to look like a burned corpse because it freaks people out more. In Freddy vs. Jason, it's clear that Freddy hates being forgotten because it makes him powerless. He manipulates Jason Voorhees excuse to start a killing spree, hoping to get blamed and feared again. Freddy's a master at playing on his victims' worst fears, and even when they're awake, he tries to exhaust them into sleep where he can do his worst. In Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, he tries to gain sympathy by showing his rough childhood, raised by a sleazy pimp and isolated due to bullying, but even back then, he showed signs of being a total sociopath. Despite his attempt to paint himself as a victim, he doesn't get much sympathy. Freddy's main power is invading dreams and killing people in their nightmares, which also kills them in reality. He usually uses a clawed glove, but he can manipulate the dream world in wild ways too. In the dream world, Freddy is unbeatable. In the real world though, he's mortal and loses his powers, although he can still disguise himself as a human. If he's killed, he can come back if there's enough fear around. Homo aquaticus from Leviathan, 1989. In the 1989 horror film Leviathan, Homo aquaticus is the nightmarish creature causing all the chaos. This mutated monstrosity, a mishmash of different beings, was on the rampage in an undersea facility. The Russians, messing around with genetics at sea, cooked up this freaky creature, and realizing they'd gone too far, they ditched their ship, the Leviathan, trying to bury their secret with it. But two crew members from Shack 7, Sixpack and Williams, stumble upon the ship. They grab a bunch of stuff from it, including vodka, which unbeknownst to them is spiked with the mutated DNA. Sixpack and Bowman sip on the vodka and they're hit with a genetic nightmare, and that turns them into monsters post-mortem. The crew bags the creatures, but they get more than they bargained for. They chuck the creatures into the sea, but a piece is left behind which starts to regenerate. The crew, including the Doc and Beck, the mine boss, slowly figure out the mess that they found themselves in. It's too late. The mutation spreads, even turning one of their own, Cobbs, into a monster who takes out the Doc. With just a trio left, the mutated menace ups its game, cutting off the air supply and trapping them. In a race against time, the survivors make a break for the lift. Jones and Williams get out, but Beck has to face the beast one last time. He outsmarts it, trapping its jaws in the latch and taking it down. They think they're safe, floating to the surface in their suits, but no. The original monster, tossed out earlier, comes back for a final fight. Deadly Spawn from The Deadly Spawn, 1983. In the 1983 horror gem The Deadly Spawn, sharp-toothed aliens hitch a ride on a meteorite and arrive on Earth. They breed like crazy and have a taste for humans. The spawns land and immediately snack on two campers who are snooping around the crash site. Next, they set up shop in the basement of a nearby house. During a storm, the unsuspecting parents of the house get gobbled up while checking for water damage, leaving their kids clueless about what happened. The younger son, Charles, stumbles upon these alien freeloaders munching upon an electrician. He figures out that they react to sound and he plays a statue to stay off their menu. Meanwhile, his older brother Peter and his buddies, they're analysing a dead tadpole-like creature that they found, but they don't want to believe the alien theory just yet. Pete, seeking some wisdom, finds his Uncle Herb being eaten by the spawn. As Pete's friend Kathy arrives, they yank her into Charles's bedroom just in time. Pete scrambles from the window to the roof while Frankie and Kathy head for the attic, and Ellen stays put in the bedroom. This doesn't end well for Ellen, as the spawn hurls her headless body out of the window. In a last-ditch effort, Charles sets up a decoy, a prop head packed with explosive powder. The plan nearly goes south when he can't plug in the electric cord, but then a smaller spawn attacks him. Charles feeds it to the adult, buying just enough time to plug in the cord, and kaboom, the adult spawn is toast. Brundlefly from The Fly, 1986. As far as movie monsters are concerned, Brundlefly from David Cronenberg's 1986 horror classic The Fly has a pretty tragic story. This half-man, half-insect nightmare was once Seth Brundle, a genius scientist working on teleportation pods, but one drunken test run with an unnoticed housefly turned him into something out of a horror show. We watch him tragically and gruesomely transform into a fly man, losing himself bit by bit. Before all this mess, Seth was just a regular, albeit brilliant guy. He knew his molecular physics inside out but couldn't handle a car ride without getting queasy. The guy also had a knack for the piano, digging Beethoven and Bach. Post-teleportation though, he was a new man, supercharged, freakishly strong and agile, suddenly not needing too much sleep. But it's not all superhero stuff. As he morphs into Brundlefly, he keeps his strength but starts getting some freaky abilities like wall crawling with his sticky hands and feet and spewing corrosive enzymes. However, he was also turning into something grotesque and asymmetrical. people. Seth the human was a thoughtful, caring guy, pretty smooth in matters of the heart, but as Brundlefly he was a different story. Virtual, remorseless, and desperate to fix himself, even if it meant dragging Veronica, his love interest, into his nightmare. In their final meeting he was reduced to a shell of his former self, but warned Veronica of the danger he posed. When he saw her with Stathis, talking about her pregnancy and plans for an abortion, Brundlefly's twisted side took over. He kidnapped Veronica, hell-bent on stopping her from harming their future son, Martin Brundle.
What the hell is that?
Elmer from Brain Damage, 1988. Elmer, the main creepy crawly from Brain Damage, is a worm-like creature that's been around causing chaos since the Middle Ages. This guy oozes his addictive blue goop that messes with human brains. This little monster's story only starts during the Fourth Crusade, around 1203. A Venetian mercenary, Matteo Grimaldi, swipes him during the sack of Byzantium and hands him over to a Borgia cardinal. In 1966, Elmer lands with Manuel Peralta, a Spanish bigwig, and he's then snatched by a Portuguese admiral, and then eventually ends up with Mabutu chief in Africa. During World War II, a German tycoon gets his hands on Elmer, and he bounces around Berlin for a good 30 years. Finally, Elmer winds up with this old couple, Morris and Martha, in Manhattan. They feed him animal brains, but Elmer's got a taste for something more human. He ditches them and finds Brian, a regular guy living in the city. Brian is hooked on Elmer's brain juice, and before he knows it, he's Elmer's new puppet. Elmer's deal is that he'll give Brian more of that mind-bending liquid if Brian takes him out for so-called strolls around town. But Elmer's using Brian to snack on human brains on the sly. This creature is a dark blue, leech-like thing with a head full of razor-sharp teeth and tentacles that can suck out brains and make his signature juice. Personality-wise, Elmer's bad news. He's a cold-blooded brain eater who doesn't care about anyone. He tricks people like Brian into helping him get his meals, all while pretending to be friendly. When Brian catches on and tries to break free, Elmer doesn't let him go without a fight and enjoys every moment of Brian's tortured hallucinations. The Hungry Beast from Terror Vision, 1986. The Hungry Beast is a blend of classic alien invaders from movies like The Thing, Critters and The Blob. This creature follows the old school trends of aliens landing on Earth and chasing down humans. The Hungry Beast is actually seen as a rogue alien, and there's some good guy aliens too, the Plutons, who actually want to help humanity out. They know how dangerous this beast is. Ironically, they're the ones who accidentally sent it to Earth while trying to protect their own planet. Originally, this freaky creature was a nasty mutant on Pluton. The Plutons turned it into pure energy and beamed it off their world to save themselves. But Earth got the short end of the stick when this thing got caught by a satellite and allowed the Hungry Beast to invade through, of all things, TV sets. This alien wreaks absolute havoc on a dysfunctional suburban family. It starts off by eating the grandfather and then moves on to the protagonist's parents and their swinging partners. Yeah, the Plutons, realizing the mess they've caused, come to Earth to warn everyone to turn off their television sets, but things go south when one of the Plutons shows up in person and is mistaken for the bad guy. He's killed and the Hungry Beast just keeps on feasting, eventually gobbling up the last of the family. Personality-wise, the Hungry Beast at first seems more like a wild animal driven by instinct to eat and hunt. It doesn't speak, but it's sneaky and sets up ambushes. The creepy part is that it absorbs the genetic information of its victim and can mimic their voices by sprouting their heads on its tentacles. The Blob from The Blob, 1988. The Blob remake, directed by Chuck Russell and penned by Frank Darabont, was another attempt to revamp those old school monster movies, much like David Cronenberg did with The Fly. They spiced up the 1958 classic with slick visual effects, transforming the Blob from a wobbly jello-like thing into a genuinely freaky, oozing entity. Despite their efforts, the film didn't exactly crush it at the box office, and Russell later thought maybe mixing humour with horror wasn't the best move. But now looking back, it's that combo of laughs and scares that make it a pretty solid horror film. This new Blob wasn't just some aimless goo, no, it was smart and used cunning tactics to trap its prey. And it had this creepy habit of showing its victims what was coming for them, dissolving people right in front of their next target. It even played with its food, taking its sweet time with people who couldn't escape. But this behaviour actually leads to its downfall. Meg Penny, one of the characters, keeps escaping because of the Blob's habit of showing off. She figures out that the Blob can't handle the cold, and that is how they eventually take the thing down. Deadites from Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. Deadites are the gnarly undead spirits from the Evil Dead series who love to hijack bodies and munch on souls. Bad boys first showed up in the 1981 film The Evil Dead, and they got their official name in its sequel. But where do these creepy demonites come from? One story says they were once wicked human souls that got a hellish makeover down in the depths of hell. The Kandarian demon found them and figured out how to unleash them on the living. Another tale hints that the Dark Ones, including an entity known as the Faceless Man, whipped up the Deadites. Either way, when the Dark Ones were calling the shots on Earth, Deadites were the go-to enforcers. But once the Dead Ones got the boot, the Deadites got locked up in a spooky place called the Mirror Dimension. Deadites have been appearing here and there, mostly from the late 20th century onwards, and they've got a knack for body snatching. They usually get in when the Kandarian demon shoots a spirit into someone, but there's multiple other ways. For instance, if you're hurt and hanging around where supernatural stuff is going down, you might just catch a case of an evil infection. Killing a Deadite isn't simple either. You can't just take out the spirit, you've got to stop it from using somebody's body. The best way is good old-fashioned dismemberment. Chop them up, limb by limb, head from neck. Getting rid of the head isn't enough. They can still control the body, and even if you do send them back to the Mirror Dimension, they can come back and remember everything from their last trip to the living world. Gremlins, 1984. The Gremlins from the iconic film series with the same name are those chaotic little dudes who love nothing more than a good bit of mayhem. They serve as a modern spin on the mythical creatures blamed for messing with aircraft. The movie's versions are small, goblin-like creatures with a thing for chaos and cruel jokes. These guys operate in a sort of gremlin pecking order, with the meanest and most cunning climb to the top. Do you remember Stripe from the first movie? Well, he was the big bad boss of the bunch. In Gremlins 2, thanks to some wild genetic engineering shenanigans, we get a whole new crew of unique gremlins. For instance, the brain gremlin was all posh and polished, but just as ruthless. Now, these gremlins don't start off evil. They come from adorable furry creatures called mogwai. We get a mogwai wet or feed it after midnight and you've got yourself a problem. The creatures also have a bit of a sweet tooth. Gremlins raid homes for candy and other treats like chicken legs and frozen yogurt. Sure, they've got the fangs and claws to be scary, but they're not really about eating people. They'd rather tear up your electrical stuff, hijack your car, or just generally wreak havoc. Their Achilles heel, however, is sunlight. They can't handle direct sun exposure. It literally melts them down to goo. That's why both gremlins and mogwai are pretty skittish about bright lights. So if you ever run into one, just remember, keep away from water, don't feed it after midnight, and maybe open the curtains. The Brain from Brain, 1988. In The Brain, set in the small town of Meadowvale, we meet Jim Majalewski, a teen who's big on pranks and constantly getting himself into trouble at school. His teachers are fed up and convince his parents that he needs to get some serious help. And this is where we meet Dr. Anthony Blake, a guy who runs the local psychiatric research institute and has this popular TV show called Independent Thinking. Once Jim lands in Blake's care, he quickly realizes something's way off. Blake's treatment methods are straight up trippy, and Jim runs away only to stumble upon Blake's dement creations, massive living brains with a hunger for humans. Back in the real world, things go south for Jim. He's wrongly blamed for a bunch of murders that are actually the Brain's doings, and now he's a wanted fugitive. To make matters worse, even his own parents and girlfriend, brainwashed by Blake's creepy TV show, turn against him. Determined to put a stop to Blake's madness, Jim goes on a mission to shut down the TV program before it goes national. He figures out that Blake and his monstrous brain are using the show to brainwash the masses. Belial, basket case, 1982. Dwayne Bradley came to New York with a locked basket. Inside was his deformed Siamese twin Belial. They were separated as kids, which Belial is not cool with whatsoever. As they plot revenge against the doctors who split them up, Dwayne becomes friendly with a nurse named Susan. Belial, hit with a wave of jealousy, lashes out and kills her. In Basket Case 2, after a nasty fall from a hotel window, the brothers end up in hospital. They're whisked away by Ruth, who's got a whole crew of bizarre monsters just like Belial. A nosy reporter tries to snoop around, but the monsters deal with her, and Dwayne gets a chance to reunite with his brother. Then comes Basket Case 3, The Progeny. The gang was hiding from the law now. Ruth tells Dwayne to steer clear of Belial for safety, but Belial's busy anyway finding love with a monster who's his mirror image. They get together and soon belials a dad to a bunch of little monsters. So yes, this is my list of the 15 most wildly grotesque monsters from the 80s. If you have any suggestions, you know where to let me know. But I was wondering, which one was your favourite from the lot? Which one was the nastiest to you? The Thing, or maybe one of the less ferocious ones like the Gremlins? Leave an answer down in the comments, and if it's a movie monsters you love, then you're in the right place. Hang around with us, we have sights to show you. And of course, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.